The dust swirled like a golden veil around the edge of Whitethorn, Arizona territory, as Wyatt Lockhart watched the scene unfold with narrowed eyes. The year was 1878, and the frontier town was still raw and untamed, much like the man himself. His hand hovered near the Colt revolver at his hip as he observed the commotion outside Halloran's general store, his weathered face impassive beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Willow Zanetti stumbled backward, her skirts gathering dust as she tried to maintain her balance. The merchant, a red-faced man named Silas Jennings, raised a bullwhip above his head, his expression contorted with fury. "You filthy thief," Jennings bellowed, his knuckles white around the handle of the whip. "I'll teach you to steal from my store." Willow shook her head frantically, her dark hair escaping from its pins. "Please, sir, I didn't take anything. I was just looking." The whip cracked through the air, but before it could find its target, Wyatt stepped forward, positioning himself directly in its path. The leather connected with his shoulder instead, tearing through the fabric of his shirt and drawing a thin line of blood. He didn't flinch. Instead, he caught the end of the whip and yanked it from Jennings's grasp. "That's enough," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of iron. He reached down and took Willow's hand, helping her to her feet. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, watching the confrontation with bated breath. Wyatt looked directly into Jennings's furious eyes. "She's under my care." The words hung in the dusty air, a declaration that carried more weight than anyone present could know. Jennings's face flushed even darker, but he took a step back, recognizing the dangerous glint in Wyatt's eyes. "This woman was caught stealing," Jennings protested, but with less conviction. "Did anyone see her take anything?" Wyatt asked, looking around at the gathered townsfolk. No one spoke up. "Then I suggest you be more careful about your accusations, Jennings." Willow stood shakily, her hand still in Wyatt's. She had arrived in Whitethorn just 3 days ago on the stagecoach from back east, and already she found herself in a situation she couldn't have imagined in her previous life in Philadelphia. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She had never seen this man before, yet he had risked himself to protect her from public humiliation or worse. "Come on," Wyatt said, still holding her hand as he led her away from the crowd. "Let's get you somewhere safe." As they walked down the main street, Willow became acutely aware of the stares following them. She had come west with dreams of a new beginning, not to become the subject of town gossip. "I wasn't stealing," she said firmly, once they were out of earshot of the crowd. "I was examining a bolt of fabric and it fell. When I bent to pick it up, he accused me of trying to hide it in my skirts." Wyatt nodded, finally releasing her hand. "Jennings has been looking for reasons to cause trouble since his wife left him last spring. You were just convenient." They had reached the boardwalk in front of the small hotel where Willow had taken a room. She turned to face her rescuer properly for the first time. He was tall, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work. His face was sun-darkened and weathered, but his eyes were surprisingly gentle for a man who carried himself with such obvious strength. "Why did you help me?" she asked directly. "You don't know me." Wyatt adjusted his hat, considering her question. "A man who would use a whip on a woman doesn't deserve to be called a man," he said simply. "I don't need to know you to know that much." Willow studied him, trying to reconcile this quiet, principled man with the dangerous figure who had faced down Jennings without hesitation. "I'm Willow Zanetti," she offered. "I arrived from Philadelphia earlier this week." "Wyatt Lockhart," he replied, "rancher. My place is about 10 miles outside of town." A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Wyatt cleared his throat. "You should be careful in Whitethorn, Miss Zanetti. Not everyone here believes in giving newcomers the benefit of the doubt." With that, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect, turned and headed toward the livery stable. Willow watched him go, unsure why she felt a strange reluctance to see him leave. She had come west to escape the constraints of society in Philadelphia, to find independence and perhaps a purpose. She hadn't expected to find herself in need of rescue within days of her arrival. Nor had she expected to be so affected by a stranger's kindness. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the desert air crisp before the heat of the day set in. Willow dressed carefully in one of her simpler dresses, determined to make a better second impression on the town. She had come to Whitethorn for a specific purpose, to take over the position of schoolteacher that her cousin had vacated due to her upcoming marriage. The school was small, just a single room at the edge of town, but it represented everything Willow had hoped for: independence, purpose, and the chance to make a difference. As she made her way to the school to prepare for her first day of teaching the following Monday, she was acutely aware of the sidelong glances and whispers that followed her. News traveled fast in small towns, and it seemed everyone knew about the incident at the general store. The schoolhouse was modest but well maintained, with rows of benches facing a teacher's desk at the front of the room. Willow ran her hand along the smooth wood, imagining the children who would soon fill these seats. Her reverie was interrupted by a knock at the open door. Sheriff Marcus Cooper stood in the doorway, his badge catching the morning light. "Miss Zanetti?" he inquired, though it was clear he knew exactly who she was. "Yes, Sheriff," she replied, standing straighter. "What can I do for you?" "Just wanted to introduce myself properly," he said, stepping inside and removing his hat. "And to make sure you're settling in all right after yesterday's misunderstanding." Willow's spine stiffened. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Sheriff. Mr. Jennings falsely accused me of theft." The sheriff nodded slowly. "So I've heard, and I've had words with Silas about it, but I also wanted to ask about your relationship with Lockhart." "Relationship," Willow repeated, genuinely confused. "I had never met Mr. Lockhart before yesterday." "Yet he claimed you were under his care," the sheriff pointed out. "That's a significant statement in these parts, Miss Zanetti." Willow felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I believe Mr. Lockhart was simply trying to defuse a dangerous situation. There is no relationship between us." Sheriff Cooper studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but a word of advice, Miss Zanetti. Wyatt Lockhart has a complicated history in this territory. He's respected, but not always welcome in town. There are those who remember what happened at Bear Creek 5 years ago." "What happened at Bear Creek?" Willow asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. The sheriff placed his hat back on his head. "That's not my story to tell. Just be careful about the associations you make in Whitethorn. As the schoolteacher, you'll be expected to maintain certain standards." After the sheriff left, Willow continued preparing her classroom, but her mind kept returning to Wyatt Lockhart. What had happened at Bear Creek, and why had he really stepped in to help her? The questions lingered as she arranged books and wrote out lessons for the coming week. Later that afternoon, as Willow was returning to her hotel, she passed the livery stable just as Wyatt was leading a chestnut mare into the yard. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and after a moment's hesitation, Willow crossed to meet him. "Mr. Lockhart," she greeted him. "Miss Zanetti," he replied with a slight nod. "How are you faring today?" "Better, thank you. I was preparing the schoolhouse. I'm to begin teaching on Monday." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "You're the new schoolteacher?" "Yes, my cousin Clara held the position until recently. She's marrying a cattle buyer from Denver and moving there next month. Clara Zanetti is your cousin." There was something in his voice that Willow couldn't quite place: surprise, certainly, but something else as well. "Yes, she's the reason I came to Whitethorn." Willow hesitated, then decided to be direct. "The sheriff visited me this morning. He mentioned something about Bear Creek. He seemed to think I should be cautious about associating with you." Wyatt's expression hardened, the openness of a moment before vanishing behind a guarded mask. "The sheriff should mind his own business." "What happened at Bear Creek, Mr. Lockhart?" He was silent for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "A dispute over water rights. It ended badly." "How badly?" "3 men died." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I was the only one left standing." Willow drew in a sharp breath. She had suspected something of the sort, but hearing it confirmed was still shocking. "Were you a lawman?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "No, Miss Zanetti, I was a rancher then, just as I am now. But when men come to take what's yours by force, sometimes you have to make hard choices." He patted the neck of his mare. "If you'll excuse me, I have supplies to load before heading back to my ranch." Willow wanted to ask more, but she sensed she had pushed too far already. "Of course. Thank you again for your help yesterday." Wyatt touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then led his horse toward the general store. Halloran's, not Jennings's, she noticed. As she continued to her hotel, Willow reflected on what she had learned. Wyatt Lockhart was clearly a man with a past, a violent one at that, but he had also shown her kindness when she needed it most. In Philadelphia, she would have known exactly how to categorize him, where he fit in the social hierarchy. Here in the Arizona Territory, those familiar boundaries seemed less clear. Monday morning arrived with a flurry of activity as Willow welcomed her new students. There were 17 in all, ranging from 6-year-old Tommy Wilson to 15-year-old Sarah Halloran, the daughter of the general store owner. The children regarded their new teacher with a mixture of curiosity and caution, clearly comparing her to their former teacher, Clara. "Good morning, children," Willow began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I am Miss Zanetti, and I will be your teacher from now on. I know many of you were fond of my cousin Clara, and I hope to earn your trust and respect as she did." The morning progressed smoothly as Willow assessed each child's level of education and began organizing them into appropriate groups for instruction. By lunchtime, she felt more confident, pleased with the children's responses and their evident eagerness to learn. As the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Willow noticed a rider approaching. Her heart quickened as she recognized Wyatt Lockhart. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then approached her with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Miss Zanetti," he greeted her. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Lockhart. The children are having their lunch." She gestured to the package. "What brings you to the schoolhouse today?" He handed her the package. "Clara mentioned the school was short on chalk and slates. I was in town on business and thought these might be useful." Willow unwrapped the package to find a dozen new slates and several boxes of chalk. The gift was practical but represented a significant expense. "This is very generous, Mr. Lockhart. Thank you." He shrugged, seeming almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "It's nothing, an investment in the future, that's all." The children had noticed their visitor and were watching with undisguised curiosity. Wyatt nodded to them, his expression softening slightly. "Looks like you've got your hands full with this bunch." "They're wonderful children," Willow said, surprised by how quickly she had come to feel protective of her students. "Eager to learn. That's good." Wyatt glanced at the sky, checking the position of the sun. "I should be getting back. There's a section of fence that needs repairing before nightfall." "Of course." Willow hesitated, then added, "Perhaps you'd like to come to supper at the hotel dining room sometime, to thank you properly for the supplies and for your help the other day." Wyatt looked surprised by the invitation, and for a moment, Willow thought he might refuse. Then he nodded. "I'd be honored. Thursday evening. Thursday would be perfect." As Wyatt rode away, Willow became aware of Sarah Halloran standing nearby, her young face serious. "Miss Zanetti," she said, "my pa says Mr. Lockhart is a dangerous man." Willow considered her response carefully, aware that her words would be repeated throughout the town. "I believe Mr. Lockhart is a man who knows how to protect what's important, Sarah. And he just donated supplies to help with your education. That seems like the action of a good man to me." Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded respectfully before rejoining her friends. Willow watched the children play, wondering about the complexities of the community she had joined. In Philadelphia, social boundaries had been clear and rigid. Here, those lines seemed blurred, shifting with the winds of circumstance and personal history. Thursday evening arrived with Willow feeling an unexpected nervousness. She chose her green dress, not her finest, but one that complemented her eyes and dark hair. The hotel dining room was modest but clean, with tablecloths and proper silverware that hinted at the establishment's aspirations. Wyatt arrived precisely at the agreed time, dressed in clean clothes that, while still suited to a working rancher, showed care had been taken in his appearance. His hat was in his hands, and his hair, usually hidden beneath it, proved to be a dark brown with touches of silver at the temples. "Miss Zanetti," he greeted her. "You look lovely. Thank you, Mr. Lockhart, and please call me Willow." "Wyatt, then," he replied with a small smile. They were seated at a table near the window where they could see the main street of Whitethorn as dusk settled over the town. Wyatt was clearly conscious of the looks they were receiving from other diners, but seemed determined to ignore them. "How is your first week of teaching progressing?" he asked once they had ordered. "Remarkably well," Willow replied, genuinely pleased to discuss her work. "The children are bright and curious. Even Tommy Wilson, who I'm told is usually more interested in frogs than books, has shown an aptitude for arithmetic." "That's good to hear. Education wasn't much of a priority when I was growing up. My father believed a boy learned everything he needed to know working alongside his elders." "And where did you grow up?" Willow asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about him beyond the vague rumors. "Texas, originally. My father had a small cattle operation near San Antonio. When he died, there wasn't much left after paying his debts." Wyatt's expression remained neutral, but Willow sensed an old pain behind the words. "I drifted for a while, worked as a cowhand on various ranches, eventually made my way to the Arizona Territory and decided to put down roots." "And that's when you established your ranch," he nodded. 5 years ago. It's not large, but the land is good, and I've built up a decent herd." Their food arrived simple fare of roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables, and they ate in companionable silence for a few moments. Willow was struck by how comfortable she felt in his presence, despite the circumstances of their meeting and what she knew of his past. "May I ask about your family?" Wyatt inquired after a while. "My father is a banker in Philadelphia. My mother passed away when I was 14. I have one brother, William, who works with my father at the bank." Willow traced the rim of her water glass with her finger. "They weren't pleased when I decided to come west. They believed I should have accepted Edgar Thornton's proposal." "Edgar Thornton?" "The son of my father's business partner. It would have been a suitable match by Philadelphia standards." She smiled wryly. "But I couldn't imagine spending my life hosting dinner parties and charity events while my husband made all the decisions. When Clara wrote about the teaching position, I saw my chance for something different." "Brave decision," Wyatt commented, "or foolish, depending on who you ask." Their eyes met across the table, and Willow felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. "But I don't regret it." They lingered over apple pie and coffee, their conversation flowing naturally from their backgrounds to their interests, and even to books they had read. Wyatt surprised her with his knowledge of literature, explaining that, during the long winters, reading was one of his few entertainments. "I have a modest library at the ranch," he said. "You'd be welcome to borrow anything that might interest you." "I'd like that," Willow replied, realizing she meant it. There was something about this quiet, thoughtful man that intrigued her, despite or perhaps because of his complicated reputation. As they prepared to leave the dining room, Sheriff Cooper entered the hotel. His eyes narrowed slightly when he saw them together, but he approached their table with a professional smile. "Evening, Miss Zanetti, Lockhart," he greeted them. "Enjoying our local hospitality?" "Very much so, Sheriff," Willow replied politely. "Good, good." He turned his attention to Wyatt. "Just wanted to let you know, Lockhart, that the Harrington brothers were seen near Cottonwood Creek yesterday." Wyatt's expression hardened. "You're sure it was them?" "Virgil Adams recognized them from the wanted posters, said they were heading west, might be crossing into your territory." "I appreciate the warning." Wyatt's voice was controlled, but Willow could see the tension in his shoulders. After the sheriff moved on, Willow asked quietly, Who are the Harrington brothers, cattle rustlers? Wyatt explained grimly. They've been operating in this area for the past year, vicious men who don't hesitate to use violence. Willow felt a chill at his words. Will you be safe at your ranch? A small smile touched his lips. Concerned for me, Miss Zanetti, Willow, she corrected him automatically. And yes, I am concerned. These men sound dangerous. I've dealt with their kind before. He held her gaze steadily, but I appreciate your concern. As they stood outside the hotel after dinner, the night air cool around them, Willow was reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you for joining me tonight, Wyatt. The pleasure was mine. He hesitated, then added, there's a social at the church next Saturday evening. Would you consider attending with me? The invitation surprised her. A public social was different from a private dinner. It was a statement of sorts, one that would certainly be noticed by the entire town. I would be delighted, she found herself saying, her heart quickening at the smile that brightened his face. Until Saturday, then. He gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin, and raised it briefly to his lips in a gesture that belonged more to the drawing rooms of Philadelphia than the frontier town of Whitethorn. With a final nod, he turned and walked toward the livery where his horse was stabled. Willow watched him go, aware of a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her: excitement, curiosity, and an undeniable attraction to this complex man who had come so unexpectedly into her life. The days leading up to the social passed quickly as Willow settled into her role as teacher. The children were responding well to her methods, and she found herself looking forward to each day in the classroom. Even Silas Jennings seemed to have put aside his false accusation, nodding stiffly to her when they passed on the street. Saturday evening arrived with a flurry of preparation. Willow chose her best dress, a deep blue silk that she had brought from Philadelphia, unsure if she would have occasion to wear it in Whitethorn. She arranged her hair carefully, pinning it up with a silver comb that had belonged to her mother. When Wyatt arrived to escort her to the church, his appreciative gaze made her glad of the effort she had taken. He too had dressed for the occasion, wearing a dark suit that, while not fashionable by Eastern standards, fit him well and emphasized his broad shoulders. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself. The church was decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, the pews pushed back to create space for dancing. A fiddle player and a pianist provided the music, and nearly everyone in Whitethorn seemed to be in attendance. Their entrance together caused a momentary lull in the conversations, heads turning to observe them. Willow felt a flutter of nervousness, but Wyatt's steady presence beside her gave her confidence. They were greeted by Reverend Thomas, a kindly man in his 60s who had welcomed Willow warmly to her first Sunday service. Miss Zanetti, Mr. Lockhart, he said, smiling. So glad you could join us this evening. Thank you, Reverend, Willow replied. The decorations are lovely. Mrs. Thomas is doing, he said proudly. She has a talent for making our humble church festive. As they moved through the crowd, Willow was aware of the mixed reactions to their arrival together. Some, like the Reverend, were welcoming. Others, particularly a group of men gathered near the punch bowl, watched Wyatt with undisguised suspicion. Would you care to dance? Wyatt asked as the musicians began a waltz. I would love to. He led her onto the floor, his hand respectful at her waist as they began to move with the music. Wyatt proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps. You dance very well for a rancher, Willow teased gently. A smile touched his lips. My mother insisted I learn, said a man should know how to move with grace, not just strength. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. There was a softness in his eyes as he spoke of his mother. A glimpse of the boy he had been before life shaped him into the man he was now. They danced several more times, with breaks for refreshments and conversations with those townsfolk who were friendly toward them. Clara was there with her fiancé, Thomas Green, and she seemed delighted to see Willow enjoying herself with Wyatt. I was hoping you two would get along, Clara whispered when the men stepped away briefly to get punch. Wyatt has been so alone since, well, for a long time. Since what, Clara? Willow pressed, sensing her cousin knew more about Wyatt's past than she had shared. Clara hesitated. It's not my story to tell, but Wyatt is a good man, despite what some in this town believe. I'm glad you can see that. As the evening progressed, Willow found herself increasingly drawn to Wyatt's quiet strength and unexpected moments of humor. There was a depth to him that intrigued her, layers beneath the surface that she longed to understand. The pleasant atmosphere of the evening was disrupted when Frank Harlow, one of the men who had been watching them critically, approached as Wyatt and Willow were taking a break from dancing. "Enjoying yourself, Lockhart." Harlow's voice carried a clear edge of hostility. "Evening, Harlow," Wyatt replied evenly. "Yes, I am. Surprised the good folks of Whitethorn are so forgiving," Harlow continued, his words slightly slurred from drink, "considering what happened to my brother." Wyatt's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Your brother drew on me first, Harlow. The sheriff and 2 witnesses confirmed that, only because you provoked him." Harlow's voice rose, drawing the attention of those nearby. "And now here you are, acting like a respectable citizen, dancing with our new schoolteacher like you're some kind of gentleman instead of a killer." "Mr. Harlow," Willow interjected firmly, "this is hardly the time or place for such accusations." Harlow's bloodshot eyes shifted to her. "You don't know what he is, Miss Zanetti. You don't know what he's done. Frank." Sheriff Cooper appeared at Harlow's side, his hand on the man's arm. "That's enough. This is a social gathering, not a place to air old grievances." "It's fine, Sheriff," Wyatt said quietly. "Frank has a right to his feelings. See," Harlow said bitterly. "He admits it. He killed my brother and feels nothing." "I never said that," Wyatt replied, a hint of emotion finally breaking through his controlled demeanor. "I regret what happened that day, Frank. I've told you that before." "Your regret doesn't bring back Jake." Harlow shook off the sheriff's hand. "Enjoy your evening, Lockhart, but remember, not everyone in this town has forgotten what you are." As Harlow stalked away, an uncomfortable silence fell over their corner of the church. Wyatt looked at Willow, his expression guarded. "I understand if you'd prefer to end our evening early." "No," she said firmly, taking his hand in a deliberate gesture that would not go unnoticed by the onlookers. "I would not." Relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by determination as he led her back to the dance floor. They joined the next dance, a lively reel that required concentration and left little room for conversation. By the time it ended, the incident with Harlow seemed to have been forgotten by most of the attendees, though Willow noticed the speculative glances that followed them. Later, as Wyatt walked her back to the hotel, the night air was cool and filled with the scent of sage. They moved in companionable silence for a while, both processing the events of the evening. Harlow's brother was one of the men at Bear Creek, Wyatt finally said, answering the unasked question. "He was working for the cattle baron who tried to claim my water rights. When I refused to sell, they came to force the issue." "And you defended yourself," Willow supplied. "Yes, but taking a life, it changes you, no matter the circumstances." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "I understand if what you heard tonight makes you reconsider." "Our friendship." Willow studied his face, seeing the conflict and regret etched there. "I judge people by their actions toward me and others, Wyatt. You stepped between me and a whip without hesitation. You've been kind to my students. You've treated me with nothing but respect." She took a deep breath. "I'm not reconsidering anything." Something in his expression shifted, a vulnerability that made him appear younger. "Willow," he said softly, "may I call on you properly, not just for socials or dinners in the hotel, but as a man courting a woman he admires deeply?" Her heart quickened at his words. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I would like that very much." He stepped closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. "May I kiss you good night?" In answer, she tilted her face up to his. The kiss was gentle, a soft press of lips that conveyed tenderness rather than passion, but it sent warmth spreading through her nonetheless. When they parted, Wyatt's eyes held a light she hadn't seen before. "Good night, Willow," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good night, Wyatt." As she watched him walk away, Willow knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. Whatever came next, there would be no going back to being merely acquaintances or casual friends. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The following weeks saw a blossoming of the relationship between Willow and Wyatt. True to his word, he began courting her properly, calling at the hotel on Sunday afternoons and escorting her to church services. They rode together on the weekends, Wyatt teaching her to handle a gentle mare he had borrowed from a neighboring rancher. He showed her the beauty of the Arizona landscape, rocky outcroppings that glowed red in the sunset, hidden valleys where wildflowers bloomed despite the harsh climate, and clear streams that provided precious water in the arid environment. During one such ride, they stopped for a picnic lunch by a small creek on the edge of Wyatt's property. As they sat on a blanket spread beneath a cottonwood tree, Willow felt a contentment she had never experienced in Philadelphia. The vastness of the landscape, the clean air, and most of all, the company of the man beside her all combined to create a sense of rightness, of belonging. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That I'm glad I came west," she replied honestly. "Even with the challenges, I feel more alive here than I ever did in Philadelphia," he smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm glad you came too, more than I can say." Their eyes held, and Willow felt the now familiar warmth that his gaze always kindled within her. Over the past weeks, their kisses had grown more frequent and more passionate, but Wyatt always maintained a respectful restraint, never pushing beyond what was proper. "I want to show you something," he said, rising and offering his hand to help her up. "It's just over this ridge." They walked hand in hand, leaving the horses ground tied in the shade. As they crested the small hill, Willow gasped at the sight before her. Below them lay a meadow filled with yellow and purple wildflowers, swaying gently in the breeze. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "I found this place my first year here," Wyatt said, his voice quiet. "I come here when I need to remember that there's more to life than the daily struggle." He turned to face her. "You're the first person I've brought here." The significance of his words wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just a pretty spot, it was something personal, a glimpse into the private self he rarely revealed to others. "Thank you for sharing it with me," she said softly. He took both her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "Willow, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before." Her heart began to race. "Nor I," she admitted. "I want to build a life with you," he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I'm not a wealthy man, and my reputation in town is complicated. But I can promise you a home filled with respect and love." He took a deep breath. "Willow Zanetti, will you marry me?" Joy bubbled up within her, unexpected and overwhelming. In Philadelphia, a proposal would have been evaluated for its social and financial advantages, weighed carefully against other options. Here, with the wildflowers swaying around them and the man she had come to love looking at her with such hope in his eyes, the answer was simple. "Yes, Wyatt. I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise, transforming his face as he pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was different from those that had come before, deeper, filled with promise and a shared future. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "I love you," Wyatt said, the words straightforward and true. "And I love you," Willow replied, marveling at how natural the declaration felt, how right. They returned to town that afternoon with the glow of their new engagement surrounding them like an aura. They agreed to announce it formally at church the following Sunday, but for now, the knowledge was their precious secret, a bond between them as they parted at the hotel with a lingering kiss. The next morning, Willow was preparing her lessons when she heard a commotion outside the schoolhouse. Looking up, she saw several men on horseback approaching, their manner purposeful. With a chill of recognition, she realized one of them was Frank Harlow. She stepped onto the porch just as they reined in their horses. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. "School doesn't begin for another hour." "We're not here for schooling, Miss Zanetti," Harlow said, his expression grim. "We're here about Lockhart." "What about Mr. Lockhart?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "The Harrington brothers hit his ranch last night," one of the other men, whom Willow recognized as a local shopkeeper named Edwards, explained. "Stole 20 head of cattle and burned one of his outbuildings." Alarm shot through her. "Is Wyatt hurt?" "That's what we're trying to find out," Edwards replied, his tone more respectful than Harlow's. "Sheriff Cooper is organizing a search party. Lockhart's ranch hand rode into town this morning with news of the attack, but he was separated from Lockhart during the fight." "I'm coming with you," Willow said immediately, already stepping back inside to gather her shawl. "This ain't women's business," Harlow objected, but Edwards shook his head. "Let her come, Frank. She's got as much right to be concerned as anyone." They rode hard toward Wyatt's ranch, Willow managing to keep pace despite her relative inexperience on horseback. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. The Harrington brothers were known for their brutality, if they had caught Wyatt alone. The ranch came into view, smoke still rising from the remains of what had been a storage building. Sheriff Cooper was already there with several men, searching the property methodically. "Any sign of him?" Edwards called as they dismounted. "Not yet," Cooper replied grimly. "But there's blood on the porch. Someone was hurt." Willow felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her. "We need to search the surrounding area," she said, forcing strength into her voice. "He might have been wounded and sought shelter." Cooper nodded. "We've got men checking the creek bed and the north pasture. Edwards, you and your group take the south ridge." "I know where he might go," Willow said suddenly, remembering the wildflower meadow. "If he was injured but able to move, he would head east over that ridge." She pointed to the hill they had climbed together just yesterday. "You sure?" Cooper asked doubtfully. "As sure as I can be," she replied. "Let me show you." She led Cooper and 2 other men toward the ridge, her heart pounding with fear and hope. As they crested the hill, the wildflower meadow spread before them, just as beautiful as it had been the day before. And there, slumped against a boulder at the edge of the flowers, was a figure in a blood-stained shirt. Wyatt. Willow cried, spurring her horse forward and dismounting before the animal had fully stopped. She ran to him, dropping to her knees beside his still form, his eyes fluttered open at her touch, recognition dawning slowly. "Willow," he murmured, his voice weak, "you shouldn't be here. Dangerous." "SHH," she soothed, quickly examining his injuries. There was a bullet wound in his left shoulder, the blood soaked through his shirt, and a deep cut on his forehead that had bled profusely. "We're going to get you help." Sheriff Cooper knelt beside them, his expression grim as he assessed Wyatt's condition. "Looks like the bullet went clean through. Head wound doesn't seem too deep." "Lockhart, did you see where the Harringtons went?" "West," Wyatt managed, grimacing with pain as he tried to sit up straighter. "Said something about the border," Cooper nodded. "We'll get a posse together, go after them." He turned to one of the other men. "Ride back to town, fetch Doc Miller, tell him to meet us at Lockhart's ranch." As the man galloped away, Willow tore strips from her petticoat to bind Wyatt's wounds temporarily. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. "You're going to be fine," she told him firmly, trying to convince herself as much as him. "The doctor is coming." "Willow," he said, his voice stronger now, fueled by urgency. "The Harringtons, they might come back. They said they would. You need to go somewhere safe." "I'm not leaving you," she replied, her tone brooking no argument, "and we'll face whatever comes together." Something flickered in his eyes, pride, love, and a touch of wonder. "Together," he repeated softly, with Cooper's help, they managed to get Wyatt onto his horse, Cooper mounting behind him to keep him stable for the short ride back to the ranch. Willow followed close behind, her mind already planning what needed to be done. The ranch house was intact, though signs of the struggle were evident in the broken furniture and scattered belongings. By the time Doc Miller arrived, they had Wyatt settled in his bed, his wounds cleaned as best they could manage. The doctor examined him thoroughly, confirming that the bullet had indeed passed through the shoulder without hitting bone. "You're a lucky man, Lockhart," Miller said as he stitched the wound. "An inch to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation." "It wasn't luck," Wyatt replied, his eyes finding Willow's across the room. "I had something to live for." The doctor stayed until evening, leaving only after ensuring that Wyatt's condition was stable. Sheriff Cooper had already departed with a posse of 10 men, determined to catch the Harringtons before they crossed into Mexico. Left alone with Wyatt, Willow sat beside his bed, holding his hand as night fell over the ranch. The ranch hand, Miguel, kept watch outside, rifle ready in case of trouble, but the night remained peaceful. "You should get some rest," Wyatt told her, his voice stronger now that the pain medication the doctor had given him had taken effect. "There's a spare bedroom down the hall." "I'm staying right here," she replied, squeezing his hand. "I'm not leaving you alone tonight," he smiled faintly. "Stubborn woman." "You proposed to a stubborn woman," she reminded him. "It's too late to change your mind now. I wouldn't dream of it." His expression grew serious. "When I was lying out there, bleeding and not sure if I'd make it back, all I could think about was you. About the life we could have together." He paused, swallowing hard. "I've been alone for so long, Willow. The thought of leaving this world without having shared my life with you, it was unbearable." Tears welled in her eyes at his words. "You're not going to leave this world anytime soon, Wyatt Lockhart. I won't allow it." A small smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." Willow stayed by his side through the night, dozing occasionally in the chair but always waking at his slightest movement. By morning, his fever had broken and color had returned to his face. Dr. Miller returned to check on him and pronounced himself satisfied with Wyatt's progress. "Keep the wounds clean, change the bandages twice a day, and make sure he rests," Miller instructed Willow. "No riding or heavy lifting for at least 2 weeks. I'll make sure of it," she promised. Sheriff Cooper returned that afternoon, dusty and tired but with news. "We caught up to the Harringtons at the border," he reported. "They resisted arrest. Both of them are dead." Wyatt nodded solemnly. "And my cattle recovered most of them. They're being driven back by some of the men, should be here by nightfall." "Thank you, Sheriff," Wyatt said. Cooper hesitated, then added gruffly, "Town owes you an apology, Lockhart. Seems like every time trouble comes around, you end up bleeding for it, and then folks still treat you like you're the problem." He glanced at Willow. "At least some people can see past old stories." After Cooper left, Willow helped Wyatt sit up in bed so he could eat the soup she had prepared. He was already showing signs of restlessness, a man accustomed to physical activity chafing at confinement. "The doctor said rest," she reminded him when he suggested getting up to check on the cattle. "I've had worse injuries and still managed to work," he argued. "And now you have me to make sure you don't do anything foolish," she countered, her tone firm but loving. "Besides, Miguel is perfectly capable of handling things for a few days." Wyatt sighed in defeat. "You're going to be a formidable wife, Willow Zanetti." "Willow Lockhart," she corrected with a smile. "And yes, I am." The next few days fell into a pattern as Willow divided her time between teaching at the school and caring for Wyatt. She sent a note to Clara explaining her engagement and the circumstances, and her cousin visited the ranch with her fiancé, bringing food and congratulations. "I always thought you two would suit," Clara said as she helped Willow prepare supper. "Wyatt needs someone with your strength and independence." "And I need his steadiness," Willow replied thoughtfully. "In Philadelphia, I felt constrained by society's expectations. Here, with Wyatt, I feel free to be myself." Clara smiled. "That's what love should be, freedom, not constraint." By the end of the week, Wyatt was able to move around the house, though the doctor still prohibited any strenuous activity. Willow found herself increasingly comfortable in the ranch house, learning its rhythms and peculiarities. It was a solid structure, built with care, with large windows that let in the desert light and a wide porch that caught the evening breeze. She could imagine raising children here, watching them grow as they learned the ways of the land that Wyatt loved so deeply. On Sunday, they attended church together, Wyatt moving slowly but determined to face the town as a couple. Their entrance caused a stir, but this time the whispers seemed more curious than critical. Reverend Thomas greeted them warmly, and when they announced their engagement during the service, there were genuine congratulations from many of the congregants. Even Frank Harlow approached them after the service, his expression uncomfortable but resolute. "Lockhart," he said stiffly, "I misjudged you. Sheriff Cooper told us how the Harringtons bragged about coming after you specifically because you'd reported their rustling to the authorities." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "I'm sorry about what I said at the social." Wyatt accepted the handshake, his expression solemn. "Your brother was a good man who made a bad choice, Frank. I never wanted his death on my conscience." Harlow nodded once, then turned to Willow. "Congratulations on your engagement, Miss Zanetti. Lockhart's a lucky man." As they rode slowly back to the ranch, Willow reflected on how much had changed in the short time since she had arrived in Whitethorn. She had come seeking independence and purpose, and had found those things in her teaching. But she had also found something she hadn't been looking for: a love that defied the careful calculations of her Philadelphia upbringing, a connection that felt as vast and elemental as the Arizona landscape itself. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked, echoing the question he had asked her in the wildflower meadow that now seemed so long ago. "That sometimes life takes you exactly where you need to go, even when you don't know where that is," she replied, smiling at him. "I came west looking for freedom, and I found you. And I was just trying to survive each day until you arrived and showed me how to truly live," he said, reaching across to take her hand. "We'll be married next month once my shoulder's fully healed. We'll have a proper wedding with the whole town invited." "I'd like that," she agreed. "And I'll continue teaching, at least until we start our family." The thought of their children, brought a softness to Wyatt's expression that made Willow's heart swell with love. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, the future spreading before them like the endless western sky, full of promise and possibility. 4 weeks later, Willow stood in Clara's bedroom, her cousin helping her with the final adjustments to her wedding dress. It was a simple gown of ivory silk, ordered from a shop in Tucson and delivered just 2 days before. Her hair was arranged with wildflowers gathered from the meadow where Wyatt had proposed, a touch that had brought tears to his eyes when she had mentioned it. "You look beautiful," Clara said, stepping back to admire the effect. "Wyatt won't know what hit him." Willow smiled, a flutter of nerves and excitement in her stomach. "I can hardly believe this is happening. 3 months ago, I was in Philadelphia, wondering if I was making a terrible mistake by coming west. And now I know it was the best decision I ever made." She turned to her cousin, taking her hands. "Thank you, Clara. If you hadn't written about the teaching position, I never would have found my way here." Clara squeezed her hands. "I think you would have found your way eventually. Some things are meant to be." The church was filled to capacity. The townsfolk of Whitethorn gathered to witness the union of their schoolteacher and the rancher who had once been an outsider, but was now increasingly accepted as one of their own. Wyatt stood at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in his new suit, his shoulder fully healed, and his face glowing with happiness as Willow walked down the aisle on the arm of Thomas Green, standing in for her father who had declined to make the journey from Philadelphia. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, and Wyatt leaned in to kiss his bride, a cheer went up from the assembled guests that spoke of genuine joy in their happiness. The celebration continued at the town hall, with food contributed by nearly every household in Whitethorn and music provided by local musicians. Wyatt and Willow danced their first dance as husband and wife to applause and good-natured teasing, their eyes never leaving each other's faces. "Happy, Mrs. Lockhart?" Wyatt asked as they moved across the floor. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. As the evening progressed, Sheriff Cooper approached them, a telegram in his hand. "This just came for you, Mrs. Lockhart," he said, handing it to Willow. "From Philadelphia." Willow opened it with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, aware of Wyatt's supportive presence beside her. "Congratulations on your marriage. Stop wishing you every happiness. Stop father and William send regards. Stop love mother my mother," she explained to Wyatt, a lump forming in her throat. "She's alive." Wyatt's eyes widened in shock. "But you said—" "I thought she died when I was 14, Willow said, her voice shaking. "That's what my father told us, but this is her handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere." The implications were staggering: years of deception, a mother lost and now potentially found. But as she looked into Wyatt's eyes, Willow knew that whatever revelations or challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "We'll figure it out," he promised, pulling her close. "Whatever this means, however you want to handle it, I'm with you." "I know," she said, her heart full of love for this man who had stepped between her and danger on that first fateful day, who had claimed her as his responsibility before he even knew her name. "That's why I'm not afraid." Later, as they drove the wagon back to the ranch, their ranch now under a canopy of stars, Willow leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that her journey west had brought her not just to a place, but to a person who completed her in ways she had never imagined possible. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lockhart," Wyatt said as they approached the ranch house, now decorated with lanterns that Miguel had hung in honor of their marriage. "Home," Willow repeated, the word carrying a weight and meaning it never had before. "Yes, I do believe it is." 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter filled the air as Willow watched her 4-year-old son, James, chase butterflies in the wildflower meadow that had become a special place for their family. Beside her on the blanket, 2-year-old Elizabeth slept peacefully, her dark curls stirring in the gentle breeze. "Careful, Jamie," Wyatt called as the boy ventured close to the edge of the creek. "Stay where we can see you." James waved acknowledgement, his smile so like his father's that it made Willow's heart squeeze with love. She leaned against Wyatt's shoulder, his arm coming around her automatically, a gesture of protection and affection that had become as natural as breathing. "I received a letter from my mother yesterday," she said quietly. "She's considering visiting in the autumn." Wyatt nodded thoughtfully. "How do you feel about that?" It was a question only he would think to ask, not whether the visit was practical or what the town would think, but how she felt. It was one of the countless reasons she loved him. "Nervous," she admitted. "It's been 2 years since we discovered she was alive, and our correspondence has been cautious. There's still so much I don't understand about why my father lied, why she let us believe she was dead." "But you want to understand," he observed. "Yes, and I want our children to know their grandmother if that's possible." She smiled up at him. "Besides, I want her to see the life we've built here. I want her to understand why I could never return to Philadelphia even when my father demanded it." Wyatt kissed her forehead. "Our life isn't grand by Eastern standards, but it's ours, built with our own hands and hearts, and what a life it was." The ranch had prospered under their joint care, with Wyatt managing the cattle operation while Willow continued teaching until James was born. Now she divided her time between caring for their children and serving on the town council, where her education and thoughtful approach had earned her the respect of even the most traditional residents. The town of Whitethorn had changed too, growing with the railroad that had finally reached them 3 years ago. New families had arrived, bringing fresh ideas and energy while maintaining the close-knit community spirit that had drawn Willow from the beginning. "Papa, look." James called, running back to them with a fistful of wildflowers. For Mama, Wyatt smiled as their son presented the bouquet to Willow with a formal bow that mimicked his father's courtly gestures. A true gentleman, he commented proudly. Thank you, Jamie, Willow said, accepting the flowers with appropriate solemnity. They're beautiful. James beamed, then plopped down beside his sleeping sister, suddenly tired from his explorations. Within minutes, he too was asleep, his small face peaceful in repose. Our children, Wyatt murmured, gazing at them with wonder. Sometimes I still can't believe they're real. Willow understood the feeling. After so many years of solitude and struggle, the happiness they had found together sometimes seemed like a dream from which they might awaken. But the solid reality of their family, the ranch that continued to grow, the respect they had earned in the community, and most of all, the love that bound them together was undeniable. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. Stepping between me and Jennings's whip that day. Taking responsibility for a woman you didn't even know, Wyatt turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. Regret it? Willow, that was the moment that changed my life. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions of living without any real purpose beyond survival. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the wedding band he had placed there 5 years ago. You gave me a reason to truly live again. How could I ever regret that? She leaned up to kiss him, this man who had rescued her only to find that she had rescued him in return. Their lips met with the familiar blend of tenderness and passion that had only deepened over the years of their marriage. I love you, Wyatt Lockhart, she whispered against his mouth. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. And I love you, Willow Lockhart, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. More than words can say. As they sat together in the wildflower meadow, their sleeping children beside them and the vast Arizona sky above, Willow knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. Not in the drawing rooms of Philadelphia, but here in the heart of the West, with the man who had stood in the path of a whip and claimed her as his own before he even knew her name. It was a love story written not in the careful social calculations of the East, but in the bold, honest language of the frontier, unexpected, challenging, and ultimately, more powerful and enduring than either of them could have imagined on that dusty day when fate had brought them together.